Concrete dust hung in the air like smoke when the ceiling gave way. Mason Reed felt the floor jump under his boots, heard glass scream and shatter, and watched a chandelier the size of a pickup truck tear free and slam into the ballroom. People went down under a rain of crystal and steel. The emergency lights flickered once, then died, plunging the 32nd floor into a red, pulsing darkness. Someone was sobbing. Someone else was praying. Across the room, wedged under a twisted support beam, the woman in the silver evening dress stared at him with wild eyes. "You're the janitor," she choked. You don't know what you're doing." Mason's face was streaked with blood and dust, but his voice was steady. "Ma'am," he said, bracing his shoulder under the cracking beam, "I used to blow these things up for a living. Tonight I'm going to keep this one standing long enough to get you out." A fresh tremor rolled through the tower. Somewhere below, gas hissed angry and invisible. The whole building felt like it was breathing wrong. Mason dug his heels in muscles burning as he shouted over his shoulder for someone to find his daughter. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Because to understand how that nobody in the stained maintenance shirt ended up holding up half a skyscraper with his back, we've got to go back 12 hours. That morning, Mason Reed was just a tired 36-year-old dad trying not to spill cereal on the lease he hadn't quite signed yet. The sun was barely up over Kansas City, turning the cracked parking lot outside their apartment a dull gold. His 10-year-old daughter Lily sat cross-legged at the tiny kitchen table, drawing superheroes in the margins of her homework. Every single one of them looked suspiciously like him. "Do you have to work late again?" she asked, not looking up. "Big company party tonight," Mason said, rinsing his coffee mug in the sink. "They want the floors to shine more than the people." He said it like a joke, but the truth sat heavier than his steel-toe boots. Night janitor at the Brand Hart Insurance Tower wasn't what a former Army combat engineer expected to be doing at 36. Once his days had been sandstorms, blast walls, blueprints, and decisions that meant people either came home or they didn't. Then there was the fire. The one where the sirens came too late, where he watched his own house burn on a neighbor's phone screen from halfway around the world. By the time he got leave and made it home was a blackened shell, and Lily was the only thing he had left. He never talked about demolitions anymore, or about the FEMA contracts he turned down. These days, he pushed a mop-changed light bulbs and knew every inch of that glass tower on 10th Street because it was the one routine he could control. He valued simple things. Now Lily's crooked smiles rent paid on time. No surprises. At 3 p.m., he swiped his badge and walked into the Brand Hart lobby, the air smelling like marble polish and money. By 4, the executive assistant had cornered him with a tight smile. "Mr. Reed, Ms. Chase wants everything perfect upstairs," she said. "She's very particular." Ms. Chase was Lauren Chase, 35, razor sharp, and the youngest chief risk officer in the company's history. She floated through the lobby a few minutes later, in heels that probably cost more than his truck payment, barely glancing at him as she complained into her phone about overdue safety upgrades and wasted budget. When their paths crossed by the service elevator that evening, she wrinkled her nose at the sight of his scuffed cart. "Try not to be seen during the gala," she said, eyes already moving past him. "This is a high-profile crowd, not a break room." He just nodded and pushed his cart into the elevator, swallowing the familiar sting. He'd been that guy for a long time now, the invisible one, the one people talked over. Upstairs, the ballroom was a jungle of floral arrangements, ice sculptures, and carefully placed brand logos. As Mason vacuumed under linen-covered tables, a maintenance supervisor whispered that the gas line inspection had been postponed again to make room in the budget for the big event. Mason's jaw tightened. He paused, listening to the faint, wrong-sounding hiss coming from behind a wall panel near the kitchen doors. Lily's face flashed in his mind. That was the moment the soft, almost polite sound of danger that told him this night wasn't going to stay ordinary for long. The hiss behind the wall panel nagged at him, the kind of sound you only hear when you've spent years listening for things that can kill you. Mason kept working, but every few minutes he found himself glancing toward that same spot near the catering doors. He tapped a hand against his thigh, an old nervous habit from days when hesitation meant casualties. By 6 o'clock, the ballroom was packed. Men in tailored suits and women in shimmering dresses drifted from table to table like they were floating on money. Jazz, spilled from the speakers' waiters, wove between clusters of executives, and the entire 32nd floor glowed as if danger itself wouldn't dare climb that high. Mason moved along the back wall, with his broom staying in the shadows like he always did. He didn't want attention. Attention had a way of turning into questions, and questions, real ones, ran too close to the parts of himself he'd tried to bury. He had just bent to gather a fallen linen napkin when a cold voice cut across the noise. "Excuse me. What are you doing back here?" He straightened slowly. Lauren Chase stood there with a champagne flute in one hand and disapproval in the other. Her silver dress caught the lights like fish scales. Standing beside her were 2 board members, each giving Mason the same tight, dismissive smile. "Just cleaning as instructed," Mason said quietly. "Well, it's distracting," Lauren said. "Please try to be discreet. Some of our donors have delicate sensibilities." One of the board members let out a soft chuckle. "If we wanted the help in the photos, we'd have hired actors." The men laughed. Lauren smirked. Mason nodded once, jaw tightening. He turned to wheel his cart away, but Lauren added, "And make sure you stay out of the north alcove entirely. The governor is coming through there for a meet and greet. We really don't need a mop bucket in the background." Mason kept his eyes on the floor. "Yes, ma'am." As he pushed the cart down the hallway, the laughter behind him faded into the hum of the air vents. He stepped into the service corridor and exhaled slowly the way he used to before diffusing a charge-controlled quiet unseen. What he didn't realize was that someone had followed him. A small hand tugged the cuff of his sleeve. Dad Lily stood there in her little denim jacket holding the brown bag dinner he'd packed for her. His supervisor had let her sit in the break room with coloring books as long as she stayed out of sight. Mason crouched down, pushing a stray curl behind her ear. "You okay, Bug?" She nodded, but her mouth trembled a little. "Why did that lady talk to you like that? You didn't do anything wrong." He forced a smile. "Some people talk sharp when they're stressed. Doesn't mean we take it in." "But she looked at you like you were dirt," Lily whispered. The words hit harder than any insult in the ballroom. He rested his hand lightly on the back of her head. "Hey," he said softly. "You know who I am. That's enough." But it wasn't enough for her. He could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the hurt. Kids have a way of believing the world should be fair. They don't understand yet how often it isn't. "I heard her say she didn't want you in the pictures," Lily murmured. "Why you work here?" He swallowed. "Sometimes people forget the ones who keep the lights on." Her brows knit together. "Well, I won't forget." He hugged her, letting her small arms wrap around his neck. She smelled like crayons and peanut butter. She was the only thing in his life that felt unbroken. When they separated, he smoothed her hair. "Go back to the break room, okay? I'll be done soon." She nodded and scampered off, but her shoulders were slumped. He watched her leave, forcing himself to breathe, even though something in him twisted tight, an old wound pressed by a new bruise. He had long ago learned to take hits quietly, but seeing her take one, that was a different kind of pain. He turned back toward the ballroom, but before he reached the service door, a sharp vibration rolled under his shoes. Just one, just enough for him to stop mid-step. He held still, waited, counted. There another. The floor plate under the carpet trembled again, faint, but wrong. Not like footsteps, not like music vibrations, something deeper, tectonic. He crouched, pressing 2 fingers to the floor. He closed his eyes. The ground shivered. His stomach dropped. That wasn't normal. He rose fast and retraced his steps to the wall panel he'd been eyeing earlier. Pressing his ear against it, he listened. The hiss was louder now, accompanied by a soft, clicking rhythm, like metal struggling against pressure. A gas line under stress has a sound, a desperate whisper-thin cry that only a trained ear hears. He heard it now, louder than before, closer. Mason's pulse kicked up. He scanned the hallway, no one in sight. He grabbed his keyring, found the flat-edged tool he used for electrical plates, and wedged it under the panel's trim. It popped loose with a soft thump. Cold air pushed against his face, wrong for a room kept at 72 degrees. He angled his flashlight inside. His chest tightened. The primary valve housing had condensation on the outside, a sign of cold escaping from compressed gas. A hairline crack ran the length of a coupler. Another few pounds of pressure, and that crack wasn't going to stay hairline. This whole floor was a pressure cooker waiting for one spark. He backed away, heart pounding, but mind clear. He needed to get people out. Quietly, calmly, without sparking panic. He turned ready to find security, but as he stepped into the ballroom, a voice cut through the air like a blade. Mason Reed Lauren said loudly enough that surrounding guests turned to look. She strode across the floor toward him. Irritation etched into every inch of her face. A photographer trailed behind her lens, already lifted. "There you are," she said. "Why are you lurking near the catering door? You're supposed to be invisible, not interfering." "I need to speak with building management," Mason said. "There's something wrong with..." "No," she snapped. "What's wrong is that you walked through the VIP section while the governor was standing there. He saw your uniform in the corner of a shot we needed. This is a multi-million-dollar fundraiser, not a garage." Her gaze swept over him like a scanner. How hard is it to stay out of sight? Conversation around them dipped. A few guests watched with polite amusement, like this humiliation was part of the entertainment. Mason kept his voice level. "You don't understand. There's a safety issue." "Oh, stop!" Lauren said, waving a manicured hand. "Don't start with some liability scare. If you think you hear something that's your lack of experience talking, let the professionals worry about safety." Professionals. If only she knew. "Ms. Chase, I'm asking you to listen," he said quietly, leaning closer. "There is an active leak in the service corridor behind that wall. It's not a small one. You need to clear this floor, right now." She blinked, startled, then laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh my God," she said, shaking her head. "Is this your attempt to feel important tonight? A gas leak, really? Do you know how many times custodial staff claim they hear something just for attention?" He stared at her. She stared back, impossibly sure of her own world view. Hearing the word custodial staff used like an insult wasn't new to him. But tonight it cut deeper, because every second she refused to listen was a second closer to catastrophe. "You need to trust me," he said. "Trust you?" She let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "For what? You sweep floors. That's not expertise." Something in him flickered then. Not anger, he'd learned to swallow that decades ago, What he felt was a hollow ache, a quiet reminder of how people saw him now. A man who'd gone from blowing apart enemy bunkers to mopping up spilled champagne. "Ms. Chase," he said, voice low. "I'm telling you the truth. If you don't evacuate this level, someone is going to get hurt." She raised her chin. "If you keep disrupting this event, you'll be the only one getting removed. Do I need to call security?" The CEO of the company hosting the fundraiser, a tall man in a cream suit, stepped over, brows furrowed. "Is there a problem here?" Lauren gestured toward Mason. "He's creating one. I tried to tell him to stay out of restricted areas, and now he's spreading alarmist nonsense," guests whispered. Someone stifled a laugh. The photographer snapped a picture. Mason standing there in his worn work boots, surrounded by silk gowns and tuxedos like he'd stumbled into the wrong world. Then a small voice rose beside him. "Leave my dad alone." Lily. She had slipped out of the break room and walked across the floor without him noticing. Her cheeks were flushed, her fists balled at her sides. Lauren frowned down at her. "Young lady, this is an adults only." "He's not lying," Lily said, her voice shaking. "He wouldn't make up something like that. Ever." The room shifted. A few murmurs stopped. Someone near the orchestra put down their drink. Lauren crossed her arms. "Children don't understand safety protocols." "Neither do you," Lily snapped. Mason's heart clenched. Fear, pride, both rising like a tide. He knelt beside her. "Bug, go back to the break room. Please." Her lower lip trembled. "But they're being mean to you." "I know," he whispered. "It's okay. I'm okay." It wasn't okay, and she knew it. She took a step back, but she didn't leave, not really. She hovered near a column, watching, eyes bright with frustration. Lauren exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling security." Mason felt the shift, then the room tilting from disrespect into danger. If security escorted him out, he'd lose any chance to warn anyone. The ballroom would stay packed. The pressure in that gas line would keep rising. And then, the floor trembled. Not a soft vibration this time. A real one. Strong enough that champagne rippled in glasses. Strong enough that the chandeliers swayed. Strong enough that conversation stopped, like someone hit pause. Mason felt the tremor in his bones. So did others. People looked around uneasily. Lauren forced a brittle laugh. It was just someone bumped a table. Another tremor cut her off. Louder. Longer. The lights flickered once, gas pressure, climbing, nearing failure. Mason knew the signs. He had seen them in desert towns hollowed by neglect, in warehouses with bad lines and worse oversight, in buildings that looked fine right up until the moment they weren't. He straightened. His voice dropped to the tone he hadn't used since the last time he wore a uniform. "Everyone needs to leave. Right now." Lauren rounded on him. "That's enough. If you don't stop..." Then the third tremor hit. Hard. A deep, low groan rolled through the structure, the kind of sound steel makes when it starts to fail. People gasped. Guests backed away from the windows. Someone dropped a glass. Security guards exchanged wide-eyed looks. Lauren's face went pale. And that was the moment, the exact second, the air shifted from arrogance to fear, when Mason knew the night was about to turn into something no one upstairs was prepared for. The breaking point had arrived, and the building itself seemed to be inhaling before the fall. The third tremor didn't just rattle glasses, it felt like the whole tower flinched. Conversations died. A violinist froze mid-bow. Lights along the far wall flickered in a sick, uneven rhythm like a heartbeat, struggling to stay steady. Then the noise came. A long metallic groan that rose from deep within the building's bones. Steel shifting where steel should never move. A sound that didn't belong in a skyscraper meant to stand another 100 years. That was the moment when fear replaced arrogance, visible on faces that had never expected to confront their own fragility. Someone shouted, "Was that an earthquake?" Someone else screamed, "We're too high up." Mason didn't waste breath correcting anyone. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what was happening. Gas pressure forcing its way into places it didn't belong. Structural brackets bearing weight they were never designed to carry. A chain reaction building itself in the dark behind the walls. The kind you can't negotiate with. The kind you can't ignore. But the kind you might still have time to stop if you moved fast enough. A blast of cold air shot from one of the vents. People jumped. A woman dropped her purse. A waiter dropped an entire tray of champagne flutes that exploded across the floor in a spray of glass. The building trembled again, longer this time. "That's it," Mason said under his breath. "We're out of time." He ran. He didn't shout instructions. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't look to see if anyone followed. He bolted toward the service corridor like a man sprinting toward a live grenade he'd spotted seconds before detonation. Behind him, voices rose in fear. Someone yelled for security. Someone else begged for the elevator. Guests poured toward the main entrance in a panic, exactly the worst thing that could happen on a top floor with a live gas hazard. He ignored the chaos. He had one mission. When he reached the wall panel, the hiss was unmistakable. Louder now, higher pitched, angry. He dropped to his knees, yanked tools from his belt, and pulled the panel open. Cold vapor rushed out, licking at his hands like winter breath. He didn't flinch. The coupler crack had split wider. Frost curled along the metal like veins of white lightning. Pressure built with every second. If that line blew here on this floor, it wouldn't just be a fire. It would be an air burst, a concussion blast amplified by the height and sealed floors. It could take out multiple levels, maybe the entire upper stack. He forced his breath steady. 4 in, 6 out. Lily's breathing pattern. The one he'd taught her when nightmares got bad. The one she used to calm herself before tests. The one that reminded him what mattered. Not fear, not humiliation. Not the voices in that ballroom who saw him as nothing. What mattered was that his daughter was on this floor, and he was the only one who understood the danger. He lifted his radio. "This is Reed on 32. Gas line breach behind the east service wall. I need the emergency shutoff engaged now." Static. Then the supervisor's voice came through. "We're reading no alerts on the system." "Are you sure I'm staring at a failing coupler?" Mason snapped. "Manual shutoff. Sub-basement level. You have 90 seconds before that pipe ruptures." 90 seconds. Maybe. If the pressure spike stayed linear, if the building systems didn't autocorrect wrong, if the crack didn't widen again, he didn't have time for hypotheticals. He scanned the corridor. The emergency shutoff on this floor, 10 feet away behind a locked safety cage. Standard setup, meant to prevent untrained hands from tampering. Lucky for them, his hands weren't untrained. He snatched a pry bar from his cart, jammed it into the hinge seam, and leaned into it with his full weight. The metal screamed but didn't give. He gritted his teeth and slammed his shoulder into it. Once. Twice. The hinge snapped. He ripped the cage open and reached for the shutoff wheel. When a thin, unmistakably terrified voice broke behind him. Dad, Lily. She was standing at the end of the hallway, eyes huge, chest trembling. His heart slammed painfully against his ribs. "Bug, no, go back." "I was scared," she whispered. "Everyone's running around and nobody knows what's happening." He didn't yell, didn't panic, didn't let his voice rise. "Lily, I need you to go to the stairwell, right now. Don't wait for me." She shook her head, tears spilling. "Not without you." Another tremor ripped through the floor, strong enough to knock her sideways. Mason lunged, caught her just before she hit the wall, and pulled her into his chest. He held her tight as the building groaned again. He could feel her tiny hands clutching his shirt, desperate. This was why he couldn't fail. He pressed his forehead against hers, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. I'm not staying. I'm getting you out. But I need 10 seconds. 10. You can do that." She swallowed. Hard. 10. "Count them while you walk," he said. "Don't stop until you reach the stairwell door." Her lip quivered, but she nodded. And then, with a bravery that nearly buckled his knees, she turned and started walking. 1 step, 2, counting under her breath through tears. He turned back to the shutoff wheel and grabbed it with both hands. It was rusted, stiff, unmoved for years. He forced it. Pain shot from his palms up his arms. Metal bit into his skin. Nothing. He planted his feet, braced his shoulder, and yanked again. The wheel resisted like a trapped animal. Another tremor hit. A ceiling tile fell. Dust rained over him. He heard cracks, spiderwebbing behind the wall. If the valve didn't close, if the building sparked, if the line split, he pulled with everything he had left. The wheel screamed, then moved. Half an inch. Another wrenching pull. An inch. His muscles shook violently. Sweat stung his eyes. A vein pulsed in his forehead like a detonator wire ready to snap. He pulled again. The wheel spun suddenly hard enough that he fell backward onto the floor. The hiss behind the wall changed instantly, dropping from a shriek to a low, fading sigh. Pressure decreasing. Flow stopping. He scrambled up and slapped his radio. "Manual shutoff engaged. 32 is stable for now. Get fire crews up here. Evacuate every floor above 28. The supervisor sputtered over the line. "Read, holy hell, copy that. Dispatching now." Mason didn't wait. He ran. Past the corridor, past toppled chairs, through clusters of terrified guests. The ballroom was chaos. People screaming, pushing, grabbing their bags. The governor's security detail herding him toward the exit. A chandelier swaying hard enough to throw rainbows across the room like frantic signals. And right in the middle of it, Lily. She was standing near the stairwell door, hands pressed to her mouth, searching for him in the crowd. Her eyes locked onto his. She burst into a sob. He scooped her up, her arms flying around his neck like she was afraid he might disappear if she didn't hold tight enough. "I told you," he whispered into her hair. "I'm right here." But someone else had seen him too. Lauren Chase. She stood frozen at the ballroom's edge, her silver dress catching the flickering lights, her expression nothing like the icy condescension from earlier. She wasn't looking at the guests, or her donors, or the cameras. She was looking at him, at the man she had dismissed, insulted, shoved to the edges of her perfect world. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "What did you just do?" He didn't answer. He didn't owe her anything. He just kept moving toward the stairs. But a security officer near her had heard the radio chatter. "That was him," the officer said, breathless. He shut off the gas. He stopped it. Lauren's eyes widened. "He what?" "He saved this floor," the officer said. "Maybe the whole tower." Lauren looked at Mason like he was someone she'd never seen before. Someone she wasn't sure she deserved to look at. The guests, still frantic, noticed too. Heads turned. Whispers rose. That janitor, what did he do? He knew. How did he know? He saved us. None of it mattered to him in that moment. Only Lily. Only getting her out. He carried her down the stairwell, his boots thudding against metal steps, each level passing in a blur. Fire crews rushed past him, going the opposite direction, radios crackling. Halfway down, Lily shifted in his arms and whispered, "Dad, are we safe now?" He kissed the top of her head. "We're safe because we're together." When they reached the main lobby, evacuees poured across the marble floor in waves, panicked, shaken, grateful to be outside the danger. He set Lily down, but kept a hand on her shoulder. She stayed anchored to him, fingers wrapped around two of his. Outside, cold night air hit his face like a baptism. Fire trucks lined the street. Ambulances idled. Police lights painted the whole block in red and blue. Reporters were already arriving. Cameras lifted, microphones shoved forward. But the fire chief pushed through first, a big man with a salt and pepper beard, sweat beading on his brow. "Who shut off the valve on 32, he barked. The crowd parted. Someone pointed. There. Mason Reed. Dust-covered. Blood on his knuckles. His daughter's hand in his. The fire chief approached him, breath heavy. "You the one who took that wheel offline?" "Yes, sir," Mason said quietly. The chief stared at him for a long second, really stared, then let out a slow whistle. "You saved lives tonight, a hell of a lot of them." People nearby turned, stared again. The man in the maintenance shirt, the nobody, the janitor. Mason didn't say anything, didn't bow his head, didn't puff his chest. He just squeezed Lily's fingers once gently. And for the first time all night, she smiled. A small, trembling, grateful smile. The kind that said she finally understood exactly who her father was. And the crowd around them. They did too. For a moment after the evacuation, the entire block outside the Brandhart Tower felt eerily suspended. Sirens humming in the cold air. Firefighters jogging toward the entrance. Guests wrapped in blankets, faces washed pale under the flashing red and blue lights. People spoke in whispers like raising their voices might shake the building again. Mason stood near the curb with Lily pressed against his side. Her small hand stayed wrapped around his belt loop like she was afraid the world might pull her away if she let go. He brushed some dust out of her hair, and she leaned her head against his arm without saying anything. A cluster of shaken donors hovered 10 feet away, half staring at the tower, half staring at him. Their eyes carried the same question. "Who is he?" A woman in a navy shawl murmured to the man beside her. He reached that corridor before anyone even understood what was happening. Another whispered, "Did you see how he moved? Like he knew exactly where to go." A man in a tuxedo shook his head. No janitor reacts like that. And behind them all, Lauren Chase stood motionless, her silver dress catching reflections of emergency lights, her breath visible in the cold night. For the first time all evening, she wasn't speaking. She wasn't commanding or directing or correcting. She was simply staring at Mason, like he was a riddle she'd never bothered to read until now. The fire chief, a broad-shouldered man named Tom Grady, stepped away from his team and strode toward Mason with purpose. His boots thudded heavily on the pavement. When he arrived, he didn't hesitate. He reached out and clasped Mason's forearm firmly. "You shut down a valve that's been frozen for years," the chief said. "I've got men who train for that and still can't make it budge. How the hell did you pull that off?" Mason gave a small shrug. Right angle, right leverage. The chief studied him. That wasn't leverage, that was know-how. Mason glanced down at Lily. I did what needed doing. No, the chief said quietly, you knew what was coming before anyone else did. You knew the sound, the timing, the sequence. A paramedic passed behind them, carrying a woman with a twisted ankle. Guests huddled under thermal blankets. News crews began collecting statements from trembling executives. But Chief Grady wasn't looking at any of that. He was zeroed in on Mason. Mister, the chief began, lowering his voice. What's your background? Mason didn't answer. Not immediately. Not because he didn't have a response, but because every time he reached that part of himself, the memories came with it. Sandstorms, radios hissing with static and panic, the scream of detonations tearing through steel and concrete, and the single worst phone call of his life, telling him his home was gone and he'd been too far to save it. He swallowed. Before he could speak, another voice broke through the hush. Move, Lauren said sharply. Not to command, but to reach him. She stepped through the thin crowd forming around him. Her heels clicked once on the pavement before she stopped right in front of him, blocking the lights, the questions, the speculation. Up close, Mason could see that the earlier arrogance had drained from her face. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair, which had been artfully perfect hours ago, hung loosely around her shoulders. She looked human now, unarmored. Tell me the truth, she said softly. What did you hear inside that wall gas? He answered simply. A coupler cracking. Pressure building. That's not something you can guess, she whispered. It's not. Then how did you know? He hesitated. He had spent so long hiding the parts of himself that made people uncomfortable because every time he'd shared his past, he ended up with questions he didn't want to answer, expectations he didn't want to shoulder, or pity he didn't need. But after tonight, hiding felt pointless. I used to work with explosives, Mason said quietly. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, combat engineer. My team dealt with breaching obstacles, diffusing devices, demolitions. I've heard metal do a lot of things it shouldn't do. The murmurs around them spiked. A few guests gasped. Someone whispered, that explains everything. But Mason wasn't finished. I knew the signs because I lived around them, every day for years. Lauren's eyes searched his face, genuinely shaken. You were military, she asked. You never said a word. He gave a humorless half smile. People tend to treat you differently when they know what you've been. Her throat tightened. He saw it. She exhaled unsteadily, her voice dropping even further. Mason, I talked down to you. I dismissed you. I humiliated you in front of an entire room. He said nothing. You came to me with a warning, and I ignored you. I ignored you because I thought your job title told me everything I needed to know about you. Still nothing. And then you saved every person on that floor. Her voice cracked. I was wrong. He looked at her, then, not with triumph, not with anger, but with a quiet, steady gaze that made her look away first. I don't need your apology, he finally said. No, she whispered, but you deserve one. Before he could respond, the CEO of Brandhart Insurance, James Copeland, approached with 2 board members, and a sense of speechless awe painted across his face. Mr. Reed, he said, clearing his throat. There's something we need to ask. Mason tensed instinctively. He expected reprimand or liability questions, or some attempt at damage control, but none of that came. We talked to Chief Grady, Copeland said. We know what happened upstairs. We know how close this came to being a mass casualty event. One of the board members nodded vigorously. You reacted before our sensors did, before any of our trained staff did, and the way you guided people out of the ballroom, another added. You were calm, controlled. You kept strangers from panicking. Copeland took a slow breath. Would you consider meeting with our Risk and Safety Council? The company could use someone like you. Someone who actually understands danger, not just from a textbook. Lauren blinked. Wait, James, you're offering him a position, Copeland said. A serious one. The board members nodded again, all of them watching Mason, like he was the one stable piece of ground in a night that had tilted sideways. Mason shifted uncomfortably. I'm just a janitor. No, Copeland said firmly. Tonight proved you're anything but. The power dynamic from an hour ago, from earlier that evening, from every dismissive glance Mason had endured, had shifted completely. These people weren't just looking at him differently. They were seeing him for the first time. And they were realizing just how wrong they had been. But the moment wasn't over. Behind the crowd, near the rows of ambulances, a tall, older man in a dark coat approached slowly. His limp was barely noticeable, but Mason caught it instantly. Colonel Raymond Hollis, his former commanding officer. Mason's breath stalled. The colonel nodded once in greeting, weathered face softening. Read. Sir Mason said, his voice unsteady for the first time all night. Saved a lot of lives, Hollis said. Again. Mason swallowed hard. Just reacted to what I heard. That's never all you do, Hollis replied. Lily looked up between them, confused. Dad. Who is he? Mason glanced down at her. The colonel answered for him, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. Your father, Hollis said gently, is one of the most skilled engineers I ever deployed with. He's pulled men out of buildings that were falling apart. He's walked toward things everyone else ran from. He's carried more weight on his shoulders than anyone should. Mason felt his throat tighten. He wished Hollis hadn't said it in front of her, but he also knew Lily needed to hear it from someone who wasn't him. Lily slipped her hand fully into Mason's and squeezed. Lauren stood a few feet away, absorbing every word, like gravity had changed direction around her. When Hollis rose, he lowered his voice. We still have work, you know. Stateside engineering, training, consulting. I've been trying to track you down for months. Mason blinked. For what? To offer you a position, Hollis said. Not overseas, not dangerous, meaningful, safe. Something you could be proud of, something your daughter could understand. Lily looked up at him, eyes wide with hope. Lauren stepped closer. You have options now. Even Copeland added, you could choose any number of paths after tonight. The night air shifted, not with danger, but possibility. For the first time since he'd come home from deployment, Mason felt the weight of the world tilt in the other direction toward him, instead of against him. The crowd wanted answers, apologies, and explanations. The fire chief wanted a formal statement. Copeland wanted a meeting. Hollis wanted to recruit him. Lily wanted stability. And Lauren, her expression was something else entirely. Something like regret mixed with respect. Mason wasn't sure what he wanted, but he felt the question rising, unavoidable. What happens next? Because after a night like this, after saving a building full of people, revealing a past he'd hidden, and standing in the glow of a truth he could no longer deny, his life could no longer stay small. Not for him, not for Lily. And the decision he made next would determine the path forward. For both of them. The fire crews cleared the top floors just after midnight, and the last waves of evacuees drifted toward waiting shuttles and ride shares. With the immediate danger over the noise of the night softened into something calmer, fatigue relief, stunned laughter. But every few steps someone still stopped to look at Mason. Some thanked him outright. Others just stared with wide, trembling eyes, as if unsure how to approach the man who had kept them alive. The board members who'd once teased him for ruining photographs now approached with gentle handshakes, still shaken by how close they'd come. Even the CEO's wife pulled him aside and whispered, "Bless you, young man. You saved families tonight." Lauren stayed a few feet back, arms folded, not in defiance, but in something closer to humility. When she finally stepped forward, she didn't carry that steel-edged confidence anymore. Instead, she said in a voice raw around the edges, "We're going to set up full relief coverage for every employee who worked tonight, including you. Hazard pay, trauma counseling, whatever you and your daughter need." Her eyes softened. "And if you choose not to come back to this job, I'll sign any reference you want. Anywhere you want." It was a quiet acknowledgement of how wrong she'd been, without forcing him to accept anything he didn't want. But Lily wasn't quiet about it. She crossed her arms, chin raised like a tiny general, and stared Lauren down. "You were mean to my dad." Lauren's breath caught. "Yes," she admitted. "I was, and I'm sorry." Lily didn't let her off the hook easily. "You should be." And with that, something broke open in the adult's laughter, a few teary smiles, and the unspoken truth that children sometimes see things more clearly than the rest of us. Before the crowd thinned, Colonel Hollis pulled Mason aside again. "The offer stands," he said, "but don't decide tonight. Take time. Talk to your girl. She's earned a say." Mason nodded. Lily had fallen asleep against his shoulder, worn out from fear and adrenaline. He shifted her carefully, feeling the small weight that anchored his entire world. He knew Hollis was right. The decision wasn't just his anymore. They headed home as dawn began to smudge the horizon. Kansas City was quiet streetlights blinking against the coming light. By the time Mason laid Lily in her bed, he felt the exhaustion settle in, the kind that didn't hurt, but reminded him he'd survived something monumental. 2 weeks passed before he made his choice. He turned down Copeland's offer. Corporate risk assessment paid well, but it wasn't where his heart lived. He turned down the board's invitation to be the face of a new safety task force. It felt too close to being a symbol instead of a person. But he didn't turn down Hollis. He accepted a civilian role with the Army Corps stateside, only designing and reviewing structural protocols for emergency readiness. No bombs, no deployment, no uncertainty. Just engineering. Just integrity. Just a job where his past and his present could finally coexist. Most importantly, it let him be home for dinner. Every night. Lauren visited the maintenance office the day he submitted his resignation. She brought a small box and a letter on thick linen paper. Inside the box was a metal gear plate engraved simply, "To the man who listened when no one else did. Thank you for saving us." The letter was longer. She wrote about her own mistakes, about blind ambition, about overlooking the people who made her company run. She wrote about her vow to overhaul safety funding from the top down. And she wrote a final line that made him pause. Some leaders fix problems. Real leaders fix themselves first. He didn't reply with anything poetic. Just a short note of thanks and a hope she'd follow through. And to her credit, she did. Brandhart implemented new inspection protocols, emergency response training, and a scholarship fund for the families of first responders who'd been on duty that night. A year later, Mason and Lily stood in a small auditorium at the Corps headquarters as Hollis gave a speech about their department's new structural integrity initiative. Lily held a drawing of the tower colored with crayons and labeled "My Dad Saved People." She showed it to anyone who asked, sometimes to people who didn't. After the ceremony, Mason stepped outside, breathing in the warm spring air. The city moved around him, cars, buses, people late for work. But he felt something he hadn't in a long time: stillness. For the first time since returning from service, his life wasn't built on the ruins of something lost. It was built on something he'd chosen. As he walked toward the parking lot with Lily skipping beside him, she looked up and said, "Dad?" "Yeah, Bug. Do you think people know what you did that night?" He smiled faintly. "Some do, more should." He rested a hand on her head. "It's enough that you do." She wrinkled her nose. "I'm still telling my teacher." He laughed. "That's fine." They reached the truck. He opened her door, and she climbed in, still chattering about a field trip next week and whether her class turtle was lonely over weekends. Before he drove off, he glanced once more at the city skyline, at the tower that had nearly taken a piece of it away, at the streets where people had run in panic, at the night where a janitor had been seen for the first time. And he understood something he hadn't the night of the disaster. Sometimes the buildings you keep standing aren't made of steel at all. Sometimes they're made of people, of moments, of the quiet courage you give away when no one knows your name. And sometimes that's the kind of structure that lasts the longest.